All right, let's get into what we want to talk about today. First, related to this entire gun conversation, it is now kind of dovetailing into the conversation we've been having ongoing about trans rights in this country. The right wing is they're so good at adjusting the conversation. And right now, the same First or Second Amendment absolutists like Ben Shapiro are now he's on board for a gun ban. He is on board for curtailing the absolute Second Amendment rights of individuals, except now it's trans people who he wants to violate the rights of.
You have the entire media that has rallied around the idea that Tennessee Republicans are to blame. When a trans person shoots up a bunch of Christian school kids, Tennessee Republicans are to blame. So you have the Wall Street Journal with a piece titled, "Tennessee Republicans Face Pressure After Nashville School Shooting." Well, it's the Republicans who are facing pressure, naturally. It's not Democrats. It's not people who promote a perverse ideology suggesting the boys can be girls. None of that. No. It's the Republicans, of course. Or perhaps it is the New York Times saying, after mass shootings, Republicans expand access to guns. Right? Because, of course, the problem is the guns. It's not the problem of disturbed people, an increasing number of disturbed people, as we talked about yesterday on the show. It's none of that. Now, the real problem is that there are too many guns, and Republicans are complicit in that. Or perhaps Maggie Haberman over at the New York Times reporting DeSantis to visit gun store on book tour days after Nashville shooting. Dems call it beyond the pale. It's now beyond the pale for you to even be in the remote proximity of guns because somebody got shot. That is the way that all of this works, according to the left. So you're allowed to take over government buildings. You're allowed to do whatever you want. You're on the left, after all. And Republicans are the ones who are truly to blame. Meanwhile, in the second kind of line of narrative here is even more perverse than the gun control line of narrative. The gun control narrative is ridiculous in the sense that this person legally obtained the guns. I'm unaware what law would be passed that would have prevented this person from obtaining the guns. I'm perfectly fine with banning people who suffer from gender dysphoria from purchasing weapons. That seems to me a pretty significant symptom of an underlying mental malaise that could theoretically be a problem in terms of owning firearms. But I don't think the left believes the same thing. But that takes us to our second narrative. The second narrative is that the true victims, the real reason this happened, the real reason a trans man shot up a bunch of Christian school kids is because right-wingers are intolerant bigots. And so the real victim here is not the Christian school kids who got murdered. Those are not the Christian school teachers who got murdered. Those, the administrators. No, none of those people are the real victims. The real victim is the shooter and people like the shooter. That is the narrative the media are drawing today. And it is it's vile. I mean, I'm not sure that I've ever seen the media turn this much in favor of sympathetic stories about a shooter this quick.
First of all, no one is saying that the children killed in Nashville at that school are not the victims. Not a single fucking person, Ben Shapiro.
Yeah, yes, of course. He's known for lying, and so we saw that, but also
just a vile, sinister character.
Yeah, I mean, they're making it clear, right, that now they're finding their limit to the Second Amendment. They believe there are limits apparently now,
right.
And the limit is trans people.
Right.
And the thing is, he's using clinical terminology. He's talking about people who have mental malaise is a phrase that he used. He's talking about gender dysphoria.
Right, which is a diagnosis.
And that leads me to then think, how far does Ben Shapiro want to take this? Because does he want to talk about PTSD and veterans suffering from PTSD? Is it going to be people who have a diagnosis of depression, anxiety, the millions of Americans who are diagnosed with any number of mental disorders every year? And does he want to have those conversations? Because, I'm assuming that he doesn't want to talk about whether or not veterans who have a PTSD diagnosis should be allowed to own weapons.
Right, because he would categorize them as more than likely conservative, and that's going to alienate or isolate a group of potential Republican voters. He's not going to do that.
Yeah, and so we're seeing this a lot. I think Greg Kelly on Newsmax just made the same argument.
Same fucking thing.
Yeah, so we're going to start seeing this a lot. But what we're also seeing is a replay of talking points that came out after the Las Vegas shooting. And Bill O'Reilly wrote, I think it was around the time he lost his show and got into some Me Too trouble. And he started
writing
what was the equivalent of a Substack back in the day. And so I think it was a blog post that he made where how
the mighty have fallen.
Where he talked about the the Las Vegas shooting and the mass death that occurred at that event was the price of freedom, is the phrase that he used. And Republicans, conservatives, they're not always so direct in using that terminology, but we are starting to see that happen again, and especially in the case of a recent appearance that Charlie Kirk made, where he made the same argument.
Now, we must also be real. We must be honest with the population. Having an armed citizenry comes with a price.
Wow.
And that is part of liberty.
Wow.
Driving comes with a price. 50,000 people die on the road every year.
Wow.
That's a price. You get rid of driving, you'd have 50,000 less auto fatalities. But we have decided that the benefit of driving, speed, accessibility, mobility, having products, services, is worth the cost of 50,000 people dying on the road.
Wow.
So we need to be very clear that you're not going to get gun deaths to zero. It will not happen.
Right.
You can significantly reduce them through having more fathers in the home,
yes,
by having more armed guards in front of schools.
Yes.
We should have an honest and clear reductionist view of gun violence, but we should not have a utopian one. You will never live in a society when you have an armed citizenry and you won't have a single gun death. That is nonsense. It's drivel. Wow. But I think it's worth it. I think it's worth to have a cost of, unfortunately, some gun deaths every single year, so that we can have the Second Amendment to protect our other God-given rights. That is a prudent deal. It is rational. Nobody talks like this. They live in a complete alternate universe.
True.
So then how do you reduce? Very simple. People say, oh, Charlie, how do you stop school shootings? I don't know. How did we stop shootings at baseball games? Because we have armed guards outside of baseball games. That's why. How do we stop all the shootings at airports? We have armed guards outside of airports. How do we stop all the shootings at banks? We have armed guards outside of banks.
Yes.
How do we stop all the shootings at gun shows? Notice there's not a lot of mass shootings at gun shows. There's all these guns because everyone's armed.
The audience for that is the same as like Roseanne's stand-up routine audience,
Yeah,
right?
I mean, who gets like fired up and like, oh yes, amen, brother? Who gets fired up by Charlie Kirk?
Yeah. Well, and especially how many times have we heard that, right? How many shootings are there at gun shows? There's so many guns at the gun shows, and yet there's no shootings. Okay,
Yeah.
So this is the same argument that we heard in the email earlier, that we will never get gun deaths to zero. So
Why try?
right. I mean, that's what we heard in the email. And it was funny, the things that he was saying, why don't we have shootings at airports? And then he said there's armed guards at airports. It's like, you have to take your shoes off and
Right.
you get a pat down, a very invasive pat down. And
Well, one of the reasons there's no shootings at airports is because guns are not allowed.
right.
There are no guns allowed at the airport except for cops.
And there's strict checking involved to ensure that people are not bringing guns into the airport.
That only well-trained individuals are allowed to have guns in an airport. Even TSA doesn't have guns at the airport.
Well, and they're still going with the armed guards at schools.
Yeah.
Even though, that has
There are guards. There are cops. Most schools have a resource officer. Most schools. In most of these shootings, there's an armed cop there.
Mm-hmm.
And then in seconds, they respond to a call, and they're there too. And then what happens? They stand around and again sanitize their hands in the hallway while on camera, not going in to neutralize the target.
Right.
But the other thing he said, which is just disgusting, is that we should just expect. This is the price of freedom, y'all. Thousands of people dead every single year in mass shooting after mass shooting after mass shooting. That's just the price of freedom. Don't know what to tell you. It's the same thing as saying, well, yeah, fire. Someone screaming fire in a crowded theater. That's just the price of freedom. Sometimes people are going to die in a stampede. That's the price of freedom.
You know what you don't hear is parents who have lost their child in a school shooting coming forward and saying, you know what? That was the price of freedom.
Yeah, my dead kid.
And I support gun rights.
Yeah.
That's what you don't hear. You hear people like Charlie Kirk, Bill O'Reilly, people that have been unaffected directly making that argument, but you don't hear the people that have actually been victims making that argument. And one thing that we are consistently going to do on the show is side with the people who are being harmed, the people who are being oppressed, the underdog. That's what we try to do as much as possible on this show. And Charlie Kirk is certainly not in that camp. No. So we definitely do not side with him.
We'd love to know what you think. We want to continue this conversation. 657-464-7609. Of course, you can email a voice memo from your smartphone to I doubt it at dollemore.com.